Well, hello and welcome to the In My Grow Show. I'm your host, Alex, and I want to thank you again for taking the time to hang out, man. I appreciate that. I truly do. A little later today, I am going to play a conversation that I had with Reverend Mary Moreno Richardson. But before that, you know what? I want to talk about a few things, just a couple, not too many. First of all, you know what? It was Thanksgiving last weekend. I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. Mine was awesome. Shout out to Pastor Steve for dropping off a bird, man. And also shout out to my wife for putting together a beautiful spread. It was so much good food that my wife made. And really, it was just the three of us. And I got to tell you, man, I did give in to one of the 7 deadly thrills of gluttony, man. I had a lot of food. I had so much food, I almost hurt myself. I pigged out so much that I wasn't even hungry until dinner the next day. And I'm not bragging, that's not a good thing. I just couldn't control myself. I got greedy. And I almost hurt myself, as I said. I hope your Thanksgiving was really good. Yeah, man, it wasn't really, and we really didn't do much. It was just my wife and my daughter and myself at home, and I tried watching the Thanksgiving Day Parade on TV, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. You know what? And I wish they would have just shown us last year's parade. I think I would have enjoyed it more because, the one they showed this year just didn't have the same feeling, man. Just kind of showed us or just reminded me of how things aren't the same, or at least, how things are different. Anyways, no point to that. Just wanted to let you know that I didn't enjoy the parade on TV. That's all. All right, so next, let's do the strain of the week. And today I'm going to talk about the Sweet Tarts. And the description for this particular flower, it says it is a cross between the ZOZ5. I don't know if that's pronounced ZOZ5. Don't know. But it's a cross between the ZOZ5 and the cherry pie. Now, the flavor and the smell to this was, it was a little lemony, cherry, and piney as well. I like those notes. Had a really good flavor, and the flower looked really nice. The thing that tripped me out was that the packaging says that this was a 30% THC, which kind of surprised me because to me, it didn't feel like a 30%. It just didn't really feel that heavy. It was a nice flower for me. It was a nice daytime flower. It let me get stuff done. That's why I was surprised that it said it was a 30, because a 30 would usually, kind of put me in a little couch lock mood. Now, I didn't find a whole lot of information about this particular strain, but I do think that it is part of the Zkittlez family, only because of the spelling, since it's spelled with a Z, or a couple of Zs. Because as I'm looking through it, this Sweet Tarts with the Z at the end is not the same as like the original Sweet Tart. The original Sweet Tart, which was a cross between the purple Thai, the Afghani, and the ATF, or the Alaskan Thunderfuck. So it is not the same as that. This, from the sounds of it, is kind of different from it, just from lineage-wise. So yeah, that's a Sweet Tarts with a Z. And, again, it was an okay high. And it was a pretty good, value. I think I picked up an eighth for like 30 or 35 bucks. So yeah, if you see the Sweet Tarts with a Z out there, pick it up. For me, it wasn't that heavy. It didn't feel like a 30%, but that's what the label said. So yeah, have fun. Check it out. See where it goes. Anyways, that, brothers and sisters, is the strain of the week. So I've been putting together a series of conversations about cannabis and religion. And the whole idea behind it is, my thinking is, since cannabis has been legal medically in California for almost 25 years, I'm really curious about how religious leaders talk to their parishioners about it, talk to the people in their temple. Whether it's Catholic or Jewish or, Islamic, Episcopalian, Protestant, whatever it is. I'm really curious about those conversations, because it's got to be a trip, to like shepherd a group of people through the modern world using this old text. I'm just real curious about, what do you talk to, how do you talk to them about it? And to be honest with you, I really didn't think it was going to be that hard to get religious leaders to talk about it. And I've spoken to, quite a few religious leaders, a lot of smart people, a lot of really nice people, and they all have opinions about cannabis. They all have opinions about drugs and the war on drugs. However, a lot of them don't feel comfortable in talking about those opinions publicly, for whatever reason, and I get it, I don't judge them harshly. So I was really glad, I was really thankful that Reverend Mary Moreno Richardson agreed to talk to me about cannabis. And that's why I was really excited to talk with Reverend Mary Moreno Richardson. And not just about cannabis, about like a lot of the different experiences she's had as a religious leader. Now real quick, just a couple of things that Reverend Mary has done in her, in her career. Now she was the first Latina priest, Episcopal priest ordained in the Diocese of San Diego. She's been a champion for victims of human trafficking, undocumented youth in detention who are awaiting deportation hearings, and for women and children who are victims of violence. She served as a delegate to the UN. She was the senior Episcopal chaplain at Central Juvenile Detention Facility in Los Angeles. Now, she's currently serving on the Santa Barbara County Commission on Behavioral Wellness. She has served as priest in charge and founder of the Episcopal Church of Our Lady of Guadalupe in San Francisco in 2014. She is retired now, but she is also the creator and the director of the Guadalupe Art Program. And those are just a few of the things that she's done. Those are just some of the things that she's doing. She's still really active in her community. Again, really appreciative of the time she gave me and of just the honest conversation she had with me. So I'm going to go ahead and just put that conversation on for you. Reverend Mary, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you.
For sure. Hey, and you know what? Before we get started, I truly do want to thank you for taking the time to come on the show and talk to me, because while I have spoken to a few religious leaders and they all have opinions about cannabis, and they have opinions about drugs and the drug war itself, the war on drugs, very few of them really want to, comment about those opinions in public on a public forum. So, Reverend Mary, I really do appreciate you taking the time.
Well, I'm glad to be here, but this is really an important issue, and it has so much to do with justice and compassion. And I've been working in the field of drugs, the war on drugs, for about 25 years now.
Yeah, and let me just thank you for being the warrior that you are about against the war on drugs, man. Because really thankful for all the work you've done.
Thank you. It's been a challenge, that's for sure, and it's been an education to see exactly what's going on and who are the different communities that are really affected by the war on drugs, which we all know are communities of color.
Yeah, communities of color and, poor communities as well. It's really
right.
Just seems like a fight against both of them. But, before we get into that, I want to get a little bit of clarification for my own sake, because I'm a little naive about the Episcopal Church themselves, because there are some similarities to the Catholic Church, but there are also some differences in them.
Right. We are what we call Anglican Catholics. They're Roman Catholics, which is what we understand the Roman Catholic Church to be. And then the Church of England, we are Anglican Catholics. And so basically the only difference that we have is we don't recognize the Pope as the head of our church. We have the Archbishop of Canterbury. And we're basically the Church of England, Queen Elizabeth and all of that. And so we... Pretty much, it's like I said, it's pretty much the same. The only difference is we have the Archbishop, priests can marry, and for the last 55 years, women are also ordained. So I was the first Latina ordained in the Diocese of San Diego as a priest.
Yeah, I read that. That's really that's a great thing, man. And again, that was surprising when I was reading it. Just the fact that you're a reverend, you're collared, but you're a female. I was like, wait, how does that? But I get it now. You're not the same as the Catholic Church. Uh,
Right, right.
um,
We do have we are have an understanding with the Roman Catholic Church. So we're kind of there's like a whole group of mainstream religions: the Catholics, Lutherans, Episcopalians, Presbyterians. It's like we're kind of the mainstream, and a lot of us have understandings with each other. So it's great.
okay, now before you retired, were you the reverend up in San Francisco in 2014? Is that when you retired, more or less?
Yes, I was. I started a church in San Francisco. It was the Episcopal Church of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and that was in 2014.
Okay, so I'm wondering, when you had a congregation, and at that time, let's see, 2014, cannabis has already been legal medically in California for almost 20 years at that point. Um, what kind of conversations were you having with your congregation as far as cannabis use, as not just medicinally, but maybe even recreationally?
I think a lot of times too, because my congregation was Latino, that a lot of parents would come to me and say, my kid just got placed in juvenile hall or got arrested for cannabis, and of course that's scary. Nobody wants their child to be arrested or have a record or any of that. And I think when it comes to cannabis, that was the biggest fear. It wasn't so much the drug itself, but it was the fear that your child would be arrested, that he'd be put in juvenile hall, that now he has a record, that he won't be able to go to college. I mean, it would just really destroy your life. And it wasn't so much because of the cannabis, it was because of the law against cannabis. And so, I try to explain that to people. And I also advocated, for parents to be careful and to teach their children to be careful, because no one wants their children in jail, right? And so that was like the biggest fear. But I also wanted my congregation to understand what was going on with cannabis, and that, it really was a war on people of color and the poor, and that the history of cannabis, a lot of it had to do with racism against the braceros who came over in the 40s to work in the fields. And, they would bring a little bit of cannabis with them to mellow out at the end of the day. And wow, that just became, oh my God, we got to get rid of this, because it's, the demon weed is going to take over, and these people are going to come and, hurt our people, hurt our children, hurt our daughters. And so there was this big reefer madness fear that came up, and there was so many lies around it, which was really sad. And a lot of us, because the war on cannabis has lasted, I think, something like 80 years, there were generations that bought into it, and really didn't understand the other side of cannabis. Cannabis has been around this earth forever. I do a lot of public speaking on cannabis, and one of the things I always end saying is, Jesus may have turned water into wine, but God created cannabis. And if you think about that, it's like God gave us all these incredible plants and things for medicinal purposes and for other reasons. We also have, wine and alcohol. And so it's very interesting how cannabis became so demonized in our society. And what we really see is, I worked as a chaplain in juvenile hall in L.A., and so I worked there for about 9 years, and I could see how the system was just arresting children for the slightest cannabis arrest. It could be like 3 kids on a corner or 4 kids on a corner at a 7-Eleven, and maybe one of them had a joint on them or something, and the police would stop and frisk them all, and this one kid had a joint. They all went to jail. Not the kid with the joint. They all did, And so this just created this open door into the system. And it, for the courts and mass incarceration. I mean, it's unbelievable how we see how many people are incarcerated in our jails because of cannabis. And it's really ridiculous. It's unbelievable how it's ruined lives.
Well, that is an interesting issue that you bring up, because it's something that we rarely hear about, and that is the way that a cannabis arrest or offense can really affect a juvenile, someone under the age. Because while we do have all these protections for adult use and for medical use, those penalties for underage use are still really severe. And like you were saying, can really affect the future of those people, of those young people. You know, whenever they get busted, we all, messed around and we were younger. We may have gotten busted, but to have that on your record and to keep you from a higher education or even, just a higher, let's say, a job skill is something that's rarely spoken about. And I don't think the issue is even brought up as much. And I'm not sure if it's because, I don't know, maybe they see it still as a revenue stream as far as like how to, keep that, supply to, just mass incarceration. I'm not really sure what it is that stops us from having the conversation about it.
Well, I served as a chaplain for over 30 years in not all our county jails, but many of our county jails, from San Francisco, Santa Barbara County, LA County, San Diego County. And you can just see the pattern. It's just this mass incarceration because of drug use, which should not be a criminal issue. It should be a healthcare issue. But it makes imagine our court system. Most of the people in jail right now are a large majority are for drug offenses or mental health issues. And so you really think about it, it's like it's such an abuse of the system, because we should be helping people if they have a drug issue, or we should be helping people if they have a mental health issue, not incarcerating them. And this is what we've done. There's this mass incarceration of people, the poor, people of color, and you see it day after day. One of the things I learned in juvenile hall as a chaplain was that children, whether they're guilty or not, they can get arrested. And minors are not allowed bail. So you sit there and you wait in jail sometimes months before you can go to court and prove that you weren't even there, or whatever the situation may be. But you sit there in juvenile hall month after month after month, and there's something like 74 gangs in LA. And if you don't join one of those gangs, all the gangs will beat you up. So what I realized was that juvenile hall was more of a boot camp for children to create gangs than anything else. It was just heartbreaking. And then once you're in a fight, that goes on your record. So now you've got more time in jail. And it's just like it works so against you.
Yeah, in a lot of situations, juvenile hall really does become a gladiator school, and it does kind of, make that record spiral a little deeper. Like you say, right. You get into a fight, you get any kind of disciplinary action, it goes on your record, this person has an attitude problem, and it spirals from there.
It spirals from there, absolutely. And right away, you're going to defend yourself, either that or they're all going to beat you up. It's crazy. I used to have a bodyguard that would go in with me just to pull me out of the fights, because there are fights all day long. These are young kids, and they're frustrated, and they're bored, and they're depressed, and they're going to fight. And so it was so sad to see how the system would treat these children. And yet it's all over the place. It's all over our state. LA County has the largest juvenile hall system I believe in the United States. And it's heartbreaking.
Hey, Rev, now you're also a chemical dependency specialist.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, and as far as do you see positive uses for cannabis in as far as maybe harm reduction, or even helping people with addiction get off of certain addiction?
I do. I became a chemical dependency specialist, oh my God, probably about 30 years ago at least, and worked in the field of drug and alcohol. And I'm also in recovery from alcohol. And so I saw the 12-step program and just how black and white it was. So, it's all or nothing. And I think that for some people, if you have an alcohol problem, then you have an alcohol problem. But I know a lot of people in what we call recovery from alcohol who do use cannabis because it helps them in many, many ways, mostly baby boomers, to sleep, aches and pains, nausea. I know the nausea was a big deal when I was working with clients who had AIDS or HIV, and they were nauseated, and so the cannabis would help them with the nausea, and it also helped them with being able to eat and keep food down. And so we all know through history that there's been wonderful benefits from cannabis. Queen Victoria used cannabis for cramps. And, there's just a whole history of it, of how beneficial it can be for people. Whether you take it, whether it's an edible or a tincture or a balm that you can rub on your joints for arthritis. We all know, it's documented that, cannabis is very, very helpful.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I always and I kind of push against as far as these, let's say these 12-step programs, right? To where a lot of what they preach is just abstinence from everything but nicotine and coffee. And I say that because you go to a 12-step program and that's all you're doing is smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee and talking about whatever you're talking about. But a lot of those, like I was saying, a lot of those mentalities is abstinence completely because they don't see any kind of use to add cannabis into the regimen to help you,
Right.
just,
Right.
Again,
well, what I always thought was so interesting also was that I would sit there in those rooms and listen to people tell me about how they're on all kinds of other medication for depression, for this, for that, that because that was legal in the medical field, then that was acceptable. But cannabis wasn't legal yet, and so that was like the demon weed, and it just kind of this what we projected on it, just this evil thing. There, how can there possibly be anything good? And so I would sit there and I'd watch all these people with all these prescriptions that they were taking, whether it was for depression or whatever it was, mental health issues. And I always thought to myself, well, isn't that interesting that you can justify that you're using pills, which we all know can be very, very dangerous. It's not organic. It's not coming from the earth. It's a synthetic drug. And yet somehow that was acceptable because the medical field was prescribing it.
Well, and for me, I also think that a lot of that has to do with this mentality, this idea that we have in Western medicine that any medicine that works only comes in pill form.
Right.
And we know that, as far as like for the Hispanic culture, the Mexican culture, we've always had this very kind of two-minded attitude about cannabis. While on one hand, our tias and our abuelas will use it, like you said, for some aching joints, but as soon as you tell those same abuelas that, hey, I like to celebrate with cannabis, you're all kinds of different things. You're a marijuana, you're heady, what's wrong with you, pull your pants, all kinds of things start raining down on you.
Absolutely. And yet, what's so sad is that in the Mexican culture is drinking is so much more acceptable. And for years, I taught the domestic violence classes for the courts. And I would teach them in Spanish. And these are all the people who were sent to domestic violence classes after they've, beaten their partners. And I would always ask, I go, before I start the curriculum, I have two questions. How many of you were under the influence of alcohol when you beat your partner? And 14 out of 15 hands would go up. And then I'd say, okay, I have another question for you. How many of you were under the influence of only marijuana, cannabis, when you beat your partner? And they looked at me like I just had to ask the most ridiculous question in the world. They're like, who fights when they're stoned? Nobody gets off the cat. Why would you do that? It was so obvious how alcohol is such a more violent drug in our society. And, most police officers will tell you that a lot of the domestic violence calls they get to or are called to, there's alcohol involved. And yet it's so acceptable. We hand a chalice to the children in church on Sundays. And, nobody has a problem with that.
Yeah, things like that are seen as normal or
Right.
European, something. But hey, Rev, so let me get your opinion on something. Why is it that some, I don't know. Okay, so why is it that some religion or religious leaders gravitate towards, when it comes to drugs or drug addiction, gravitate towards punishment instead of treatment as the answer?
Well, I would believe that maybe those are the religious groups who just believe that, that punishment is the answer for anything they feel someone has done something wrong. You know what I mean? Kind of a punitive idea of punishing God
Kind of like an
or you
Old
must be
Testament God.
punished. Yeah, that Old Testament God, or you must be punished because you're not following the rules, you know. And yet, there's so much judgment behind that. Who's making the rules, you know? And I just think that we've gone through such a difficult time in this country, starting with Reagan and the war on drugs and Just Say No and all of this reefer madness mentality, which is just really, I mean, there's people who really still believe that, really believe those lies. And they haven't taken the time to just really explore the history of cannabis in this country. I mean, you can go back to Randolph Hearst, who had all the logging companies up in Washington and Oregon back in the 60s, and what he did. We used to use hemp. I remember when I was in school, all my books were made out of hemp paper. All the maps from National Geographic were made out of hemp paper. And then all of a sudden they changed the law and they made it illegal because Hearst wanted, you know, the trees to be used for paper. So if you look back at the history, you really see how money and greed and all of these other things changed the face of what made cannabis the problem. Not, you know, the lumber where people were, you know, cutting down trees like crazy and cutting down forests and using that for paper instead of hemp, which hemp is, you know, a clean crop. Hemp helps the earth. I mean, that's one of the things we really need to understand is just all the incredible benefits of this plant from it being hemp. I mean, our forefathers, George Washington, Jefferson, they all had hemp farms. You know, and people don't know that. It's really interesting when I tell people that. I go, did you know George Washington, you know, he became very wealthy because he had hemp farms. And like, what? People can't even believe that.
Yeah, I believe at that time also every landowner, you had to grow at least an acre of hemp.
Yeah.
By law.
Right.
By law, because it was used for everything. Rope, canvas. Yeah, it was, you know, clothes. It was the textile. It lended itself to a lot of things.
Exactly.
You know.
Exactly. So I think, you know, one of those things is that we just really need to examine the information. And I get it. I mean, I've had so many parents tell me, because I was so outspoken about cannabis, telling me, you know, we feel really uncomfortable that you're talking about cannabis in a positive way. This is a really bad example for our children. And I'd say, well, okay, let's sit down and talk about this. I said, I'm not encouraging children to use any kind of drug or alcohol. That's ridiculous. And nobody wants their children to do that. I mean, your minds aren't developed yet, and nobody wants their children experimenting with drugs or alcohol. And but I think, you know, parents get scared. Parents are afraid. Now, you can't blame them. You know, the criminal justice system is a monster. And,
sure. Yeah,
and
nobody
wants their child in trouble.
So do you think it was that you weren't talking about it in a fear-based sense as like the big boogeyman, or that you were just having an honest conversation that they weren't used to?
Mm-hmm. I think so, because I know I've worked with a lot of drug and alcohol programs. I've worked with Drug Policy Alliance out of New York, and that was one of their big things, was to really educate people on the war on drugs, and mostly on cannabis. And they would have a lot of information to give out to people, how to talk to your children about cannabis now that it's legal, because now it's flipped, right? All our children are looking at us going like, wait a minute, you've been telling me for 10 years I shouldn't touch this stuff, and now it's legal and you're smoking it at night? What are you talking about? You know, there's this hypocrisy that our children are just shaking their heads and, oh my God, you know, what is going on with all these lies?
Not only that, but there's this kind of juxtaposition, this little switch of position to where the younger generation is actually helping to educate the older generation on certain things. As far as like the older generation will say something, younger generation will like, look, that's not true. Scientifically, it's not true. You may feel morally or whatever, that's just you're repeating everything you've heard for the last 80 years, but that's all just based on a lot of fear.
Right, absolutely. And also what I saw in my work, which really broke my heart, is how many children were taken away from their parents, separated from their parents, and put into the foster care system because mom was smoking a joint. And that is a disaster. Our foster care system is in crisis. And when I worked in juvenile hall, I can't tell you how many children I met who were victims of this. You know, mom, they may have been 5 years old. Mom got busted for smoking a joint. Now she went off to prison. I mean, people end up in prison, not jail, you know, in those times for smoking pot or having drugs, or there's that whole zero tolerance. And, you know, I had children in juvenile hall who were like 14, had no idea where mom was. No idea. They'd just been separated. They had become addicts already. They were like heroin addicts or meth addicts. And, you know, a lot of them would say, well, you guys lied to us about cannabis, so we figured you lied to us about heroin and everything else. And if you think about it, it's like they're not off, you know?
Yeah, you know, I remember, you know, being in elementary school in the 80s, you know, with Ronnie and Nancy out there telling kids, yeah, go ahead and report your parents. It'll be okay.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Can you imagine that? And I can't, you know, our foster care system is so sad. I mean, most of the children that come out of foster care, they are like the largest population that are victims of human trafficking. They're like sitting ducks. They have nothing. Once they turn 18, they have nothing. They're usually kicked out of the home where they were in foster care, and now they're on their own. And so many of them become victims of traffickers. So I think that, and that goes right back to all these drug arrests, you know, cannabis arrests for people. It's just heartbreaking to see what's happened.
Yeah, again, that's something we don't talk about a lot. Also, is a lot of these kids who age out of the system, like you were saying, at 18 they age out. And they, you know, the states are like, well, you're an adult. Good luck.
Yeah.
With really no guidance, no support system out there for them. They figure at 18 you're an adult and you should fend for yourself. And you're talking about young people who are really, like you were saying, really vulnerable, man.
They're
really
so
just they're on so many levels, you know, looking for, you know, either someone to help them or just someone to tell them what to do because they've been told what to do their whole lives and that's all they know.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
At that point, institutionalization, and then they're used to being in the system, so it feels natural.
Right. Absolutely. And it's just so heartbreaking, you know, because there's so much violence in the system. And I remember when I was working in juvenile hall as a chaplain, they asked me if I would work with the younger kids. So I said, oh, yeah, sure. So I had no idea what younger kids meant. And so I went to this room where they had them all, and they were all sitting in a circle. And these were kids that were like 6, 7, and 8 years old. Their feet didn't even reach the ground, right? They were so young. And these are the kids who'd run away from abusive foster homes. And if you run away from a foster home, you get put in juvenile hall. So here's this whole circle of kids, probably about 15 of them, who have run away from abusive foster home. One kid showed me his back where the alcoholic foster dad had put cigarettes out on his back and put his initials on him. Jesus. I mean, just horrible, horrible stuff. And these are kids sitting in jail now. You know, I think that we have no idea what's going on in our jails sometimes when we talk about the horrors and the abuse, and it's right here in our own country, and it's in our institutions.
You know, and the other thing we should also mention while talking about this is the fact that if you're in public housing and you're caught, either someone in your house is caught with cannabis or any other kind of drug, you pretty much you may likely lose your housing.
Right. Yeah, I know that a lot of people are fighting that now because it's now legal, but for the longest time, you're right. Yeah, you would lose your housing. You would lose a lot of benefits. But, you know, if you drank and beat up your partner, that, you know.
They're okay with that. If you drank and had some pills, you're all right. But cannabis, a plant, no, they'll throw you out into the street, your family, and then, you know, put the kids in the system. And yeah, that's.
So it's a very, you know, there's an organization called LEAP. It's called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and this was started by the chief of police in Seattle, Washington. And why he started it was that back during Reagan time, when they started the whole big war on drugs, his police department was given one of the biggest grants, I guess you could call it, and money and resources and everything to fight this horrible cannabis war. And what he would do is he would go what is it, like underground, and go into the colleges, go to the parties, and he would sit in a circle with these college kids, pull out a joint, and pass it around, and then arrest them. And
What?
it got to him, arrest him. This is what they were doing in like the 70s and stuff. He would arrest them all for marijuana charges. And then what happened was he couldn't live with himself. He had so much guilt that he created this organization called LEAP. And it still is, it's called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Because he just said, I can't do this. I'm ruining kids' lives because they smoked a joint. I'm ruining their lives. And so he really brought some light into the whole topic of what was going on. And there are other organizations. There's one called Clergy Against Prohibition. The clergy, there's a video called Clergy Speak Out Against Prohibition, which I'm in that, and there's a rabbi and a nun out in Recker Island, and she talks about all of the offenses in there that are drug-related, cannabis-related.
Yeah, I saw that. It's on YouTube. That was really
Right.
it was a really interesting little movie to watch.
Right, and the other part too is that people get so upset because now cannabis is legalized, and somehow they feel that that's going to bring more violence into our streets. No, it was the war on drugs that brought the violence into the streets. That everything was fine. It's like all of a sudden, here comes the raids, and they're busting into your homes, and they find a little marijuana, and they've completely demolished your home, but they found a bag of cannabis, so that's it. Now you're going to jail. Your house is thrashed. They're going to take your house away. And it's just insane. It's insane what happens to people. I had a neighbor up in San Diego who had, he was a senior citizen, and he had, kidney cancer. And he had he had legal marijuana. It was legal cannabis, and this is when it was already medically legal. And he was growing, I think, 3 plants in his garage, and all of a sudden there was this huge raid, and it was the police department, the DEA, the sheriff's department, and they thrashed his house, just thrashed his beautiful, beautiful home, arrested him, threw him in jail, and he wasn't guilty. He wasn't guilty at all. He had legal permission to do everything he was doing, but they just came in and did that. That was in San Diego about, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago.
Wow.
It's awful. It's just shameful how we see, what happens. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see this.
Hey, Rev, let me take you back a little bit. I want to kind of continue on that idea. So, what do you tell parents when they come to you and, or how do you help them put that into perspective as far as their kids they found cannabis on their kids,
Well, I'll explain to them, and I'll also give them information. Drug Policy Alliance has a lot of brochures and information on, how to talk to your children about cannabis or how to inform yourself about cannabis. So there's information out there, all kinds of information now. And now with the legalization, I was working for an organization in Santa Barbara called COPSUN. And what they did was educational forums with doctors and all kinds of leading professionals, and they would be all over Santa Barbara County. You could come and listen, and they would answer all your questions about cannabis and give you, the honest update truth about what was going on and how it was beneficial. We also had tours of the different grows, the different farmers that took you in and showed you how this is like a clean organic crop. It's not like avocados or anything else that we grow where there's pesticides all over them. This is organic, and it's mandated to be organic, which is good. And so, yet we have so many people complaining about the smell, but there's no pesticides flying over your house. And so I think that people just need to educate themselves a lot more before making any judgments about if this is good or this is bad.
Yeah, for sure. Education is it's the biggest thing, really. I mean, and that's the only way we're going to get around the whole 80 years of
Right. It's
propaganda.
education,
You know.
educating ourselves. Absolutely.
Hey, Rev.
Um,
So let me ask. I want to talk to you a little bit about your work you did as a delegate in the UN. Because
mhm.
right now, I mean, the UN's talking about changing the classification of cannabis.
Right.
I just want to get your thoughts on that. What
Oh my
kind of
gosh.
work were you doing in the UN while you were a delegate? I mean, what were the main
I
problems
served
there?
as I served as a delegate to the United Nations on the issue of immigration, human trafficking, and the war on drugs because I think they crash into each other. You really can't separate those, and they crash into each other. And so what we're doing is once again is just bringing light to the subject about how it's harming communities, how it's harming immigrants, how it's harming, the law is harming the children in so many places. And I think that, once we made all these drugs or cannabis illegal, it made such a demand all over the place from Colombia to Mexico. I mean, there was just all this need to sell and buy. And as long as there's a buyer, there's going to be a seller. Um, so, we look at it now and we don't see the violence in the streets. And people were afraid of that. People were so afraid that if we legalized cannabis, that there would be more violence in the streets. And it's the complete opposite.
Well, people were afraid
I,
there were going to be more of everything: violence,
yeah, yeah.
crime.
Yeah, I remember I had to go and testify up in Sacramento when we had Prop 19, the first time we were trying to legalize cannabis. And I went up to testify, and I remember telling him, I said, people were saying, but what about our children? We're not protecting the children. It's like, yes, we are protecting our children because we're not protecting them when it's illegal. I said, if you took me and a 15-year-old girl and you sent me across the street, there's this big park. I said, if you sent me across the street to that park with a 15-year-old girl, guess who's going to get the free joint? It's not me. I'm not going to get offered the free joint. I said, your 15-year-old will get offered the free joint, and you won't even know what's in it. You don't know if it's laced with anything dangerous. You have no idea what they put in it. I said, now that we've legalized it, it's organic, and there's all kinds of different restrictions on how it has to be processed and grown and marketed. All of that is protected. And it's so much better to have it legal than to have it illegal because we're not protecting our children at all. And two, we don't have any idea of what they're selling.
Yeah, that's one thing that some people don't understand is that when you vote for legal cannabis, you're not so much voting for access because you can get weed anywhere, especially in California. It's not a matter of I can't get my weed. It's a
Right.
matter of, really making it legal, bringing it out into the light, and putting some protections behind it. People are using it
Absolutely.
anyways. And,
Absolutely.
instead of diverting all of this capital into the black market, let's divert it back into the community.
Absolutely. That's so true. It's, and now we see here in Santa Barbara County, the tax revenues are amazing. I mean, they're really helping a lot of our nonprofit organizations stay in business. I serve as a commissioner here in Santa Barbara County for behavioral wellness, which is all our drug and alcohol programs and mental health programs. And after the mudslides, we were really worried that a lot of these programs were going to have to close because Montecito was the big resource. But after the mudslides, that kind of ran dry. So we were thinking, oh my God, what are we going to do for resources for all of these programs? And I had been talking about this at our meeting saying, well, we need to look at the cannabis industry. And it's amazing because people would look at me like, oh my God, she said the C word,
In
And I'm like,
public.
we need to talk about this. We need to talk about cannabis. And now we see, I think it was like $6.5 million came in this last year on tax revenues. That's really helping our community. And I also have been invited to serve on a committee here in Santa Barbara County that was put together by one of our growers, Graham Farrar, who is the owner of Pharmacy and also has a grow in Carpinteria. And he's formed a committee of community leaders, and we will be looking at we'll be looking at 3 different issues, and that is homelessness, violence against women and children, and oh God, what was the last one? Oh, the environment, and so we will be giving grants on different agencies who's working on this. So we're really excited about all the positive things again that the cannabis community is able to do for us here in Santa Barbara County.
Yeah, you know what? Shout out to Graham. I've had him on my show. He really is community oriented. He really is looking on how cannabis can help the community at large. You know, not just
absolutely.
I mean, you know, it's one thing because he doesn't have to do this. He could just go on in the industry and,
right,
you know, just exist and just make money. But
yeah.
the guy is really heavily into his community, and that's great. That's awesome. Shout out to Graham.
Absolutely. We're so excited about that. And, I mean, he really cares. You know, his biggest issue for him is homelessness and the environment. So, you know, those are two huge issues. And I'm just so excited that, you know, we can see the benefits of our cannabis industry here in Santa Barbara County.
Hey, Rev, so with your work in the mental health and the behavioral sector, what kind of pushback do they embrace cannabis at all? As far as, because I know, you know, there are a couple of conversations about cannabis and psychosis, but it's all about how you read the science,
right?
You know,
right.
So I'm just wondering what kind of conversations you have in that aspect.
I don't know if I'm like, you know, I'm not a doctor. I'm 69 years old, and I don't use any kind of medications except cannabis. And, you know, every time I go to the doctor, they won't even examine me yet, but right away they're like, oh, well, you probably need this hormone, and you probably need this, and you probably might need that. And I'm like, why? What do I need it for? You haven't even given me a blood test. You haven't even examined me. Well, your age. And I'm like, really? You know, you want to give me medication and drugs? I mean, and I had one doctor at a clinic here, and she came in, she looked at my file, and she said, you forgot to write your medications. I didn't forget anything. I don't take medications. And she says, well, you know, considering your age, I mean, you probably need hormones. I mean, it just seemed like talk about pushing drugs. You know, that's how it felt. I felt like I was in a room with a drug pusher telling me I needed all these different medications. And I said, you know what? No, I don't need them, and I don't take anything else. And then, you know, she was getting kind of, what would I say? She was getting kind of rude about it. And so finally I just said, well, you know, I do use cannabis. And she gave me, you know, that
eye roll.
That eye roll.
I get it. Oh, you know, I was going to say that because every time I go to the doctor, and I don't go to the doctor a lot, but they're like, oh, what are your medications? I'm like, just cannabis. They roll their eyes, just make eye contact for a long time. Like, huh?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, that's it, man. You know, I don't have high blood pressure. I don't
Me
have
either.
all these things. You know, I wear glasses. That's about it. But I was using cannabis, man.
Right.
And yeah, sometimes
yeah,
I did have one of my doctors would just roll her eyes. I was like, roll your eyes if you want. We can have the conversation too.
Right.
But again, she really, and at the same time, she never really wanted to have that conversation with me about it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, she would only want to have the conversation about what she read as far as the negatives.
Right. Yeah,
well,
and that's what I always say. It's like, who wrote that?
And it could be that. You know? Well, Doc, look, with all due respect.
Right.
Well,
it's interesting because she asked me, how long have you been taking that? And I said something. I go, I think since about 1968. And it's like, okay. It's been working.
Exactly. Yeah, because they've asked me, you know, the same thing. And it's just an interesting thing, the way you get it from medical professionals.
And I've had both. I've had medical, medical doctors who support it, and I've had other ones that are just, you know, freaking out. So I think we're right in the middle of that. You know, just because it hasn't been legalized that long, I think people are starting to learn that we can have a different understanding of what cannabis is really about.
Well, you know what? I also think it's the fact that a lot of medical schools really don't have a curriculum for cannabis.
They hardly have a curriculum for alcoholism.
And I don't know if that's because, you know, they get a lot of federal grants, or they just don't want to take the time. I don't know what it is, man. It's an antiquated way of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. A lot of
You
people
know?
think it's because they're just being trained to hand out drugs, which probably is a real negative thing to say. But you know what I mean? It's like
Well, it's a real simple way to put it. I mean, it could just be that they're, I don't know, whether the information, because it's not like it hasn't been in the pharmacopoeia since the
yeah,
30s or
right,
something.
right, yeah. And we see the horrible problems that we have with like Oxycontin and all these drugs that are painkillers, and people get so hooked, and then they end up on the streets, and those are all given out by doctors. And I know when I went to the doctor one time, I had a sore elbow. I think I had frozen shoulder, and right away they were like writing out all kinds of prescriptions for painkillers, and I'm like, no, 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 I don't need that. Like, you sure? And like, here, take it just in case you change your mind. Like, I had a purse full of like anything you could think of. I didn't use them, but I just thought, my God, they hand them out like candy.
Yeah, they they really do. It's really easy for them. It's amazing. It's
Right,
amazing.
yeah, and yet I'll sit there and say, no, I'll have a little bit of cannabis for the pain. I'll be fine. And they look at you like, oh my God.
How dare you? Hey, Ref. So, what kind of experiences have you had with people with PTSD? And
I'm a hypnotherapist, and so I specialize in trauma, and that's what I work with a lot. Are people with PTSD, victims of human trafficking, are veterans, first responders, and a lot of times they've asked me, I've thought about using cannabis, and I said, that's up to you. I said, I would support that if you think that. I'm not a doctor or anything, and it's your choice. But I think that it's sad that our veterans aren't allowed to use cannabis. I think there was some ruling saying that our veterans couldn't use that, but yet they're giving all these heavy-duty drugs.
yes, I know just the very basics as far as the issues with the veterans and cannabis has a lot to do with them actually, you could lose your benefits in certain places as far
Right.
as,
Exactly.
and
That's
I'm
ridiculous.
supposed to talk to a veterans group here in a few weeks, but I really don't have details. I really couldn't, but I know that it is an issue, and a lot of
Yeah.
it has to do with just the federal standing of the way cannabis is.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
yeah, there are a lot of different issues, especially for the veterans.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's heartbreaking because it could be so simple.
Yes, for sure.
It's
It
so simple.
it seems like a very simple kind of, not, I don't want to say a fix, but another way to help them. People who
Exactly.
suffer from
Another
PTSD.
option. Absolutely. And I'm not saying, that cannabis is good for everybody. Everybody needs to make their own choices, and it, maybe it doesn't work for everyone. That's fine, but it is an option for a lot of people.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I've never been the advocate to say that cannabis is a panacea, that it'll solve every issue you got.
Right.
For
Right.
everyone, because there are some people who shouldn't be on drugs. That's the honest truth. I've met people that was like, no, you're way too high strung to be on edibles, because that would just fucking put you on a different level. Sorry about the cussing.
Right. But I think also that people are becoming more educated about it. I know there was a nurse who had one of the first dispensaries here in Santa Barbara, and she was a wonderful educator on how to use it for different situations. She's really well read, and that was so helpful because people could go to her dispensary and say, this is what I have, this is my ailment, and she would tell them, the different strains, the different ways to use it, and she was so helpful, and I think that's exactly what we need.
It is just the fact where people can actually ask questions and not feel like they're going to get yelled at. Even as an adult, nobody wants to be chastised.
Oh, absolutely.
The whole thing of how dare you is like, whoa, I just had a question.
Right. And I think that's, for a long time, we've all had to hide because nobody wanted to get arrested. We've all had to hide our cannabis use, and now we're out. And it's like, I'm not ashamed. I'm really proud of it. It helps me. It helps me in many, many ways. It helps me sleep. relaxes me. It gives me wonderful ideas for art. So, there's some benefits, and I think that we just need to lighten up a lot. Like I always say, this is God created this incredible plant for us.
Well, see now, yeah, you say that, but on religious ends, I don't know what it is. I mean, here's my opinion. Is it that religious leaders or religion itself thinks that you should find enlightenment or elevation only through God? Is that the pushback to not just cannabis, but all, anything that makes you feel intoxicated?
Well, I mean, it depends which religion, because there's some that don't even allow you to dance or drink. And there's other religions that, that's like the main thing, you get to drink. So, I mean, it just depends which religion you're talking about, But I also believe that sometimes religion can be so judgmental. And we have so many different denominations and how they think. Some of them are very, very strict, old-fashioned, everything's black and white, kind of the Old Testament God. And then there's other, the Episcopalians, we're kind of known for we believe in everything and we believe in nothing. So, we're pretty progressive, and we're pretty, easy does it. We respect other people's ideas and how they want to act in life or what they want to do. So it just depends, I think, on the religion. There's some that are, we know there's some religions that are very, very strict.
Hey, Rev, so the divide between the Episcopalian and the Roman Catholic Church, did that come because of Martin Luther?
No, Martin Luther were the Lutherans. No, the divide came with Queen Elizabeth and Queen Mary. Queen Elizabeth was basically the daughter of Henry VIII.
Okay.
And so was Queen Mary, and Mary was a Catholic and Elizabeth was a Protestant. And so when they were having the big religious wars, Queen Elizabeth created what was known as the Anglican Church. Here in the United States, we call it the Episcopal Church, because all through the world they call it the Anglican Church, but in the United States they call it the Episcopal Church because during the Revolution, they were fighting England, and so they wanted to not use words that were in any way English. So Anglican was very English, so they changed it to Episcopal. Yeah, the Episcopal Church.
Okay. All right, right on. Just
a little history.
Hey, that's well, I'm here to learn, man.
Yeah.
Hey, so I want to talk to you a little bit about your work with the Guadalupe Art Program.
Okay, sure. I created the Guadalupe Art Program, oh my gosh, probably about 20 years ago in LA when I was working at Central Juvenile Hall. And what I did is it's a spiritual program where participants, mostly kids, paint themselves into the image of the divine. And a lot of times if they were Catholic, they would paint themselves into the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe using her colors and her protection, and it was just a really wonderful thing. Other kids, I use the idea of painting yourself into your guardian angel. So this started in Central Juvenile Hall, and then I went down to San Diego, and I started working at a detention center for undocumented youth, and these are all the children from all over the world that come to cross the borders, and they're arrested and put into detention. And so I took the program there, and a lot of those children, a lot of them are trafficked. And so I was able to work with them. And through the art, it's just such a healing, activity. And so what I would do with the children this is one of the activities we would do was to have them paint themselves. And it was amazing because so many of these children are so broken. They're just mostly, if they've been sexually trafficked, they're just so broken. And so this was a wonderful opportunity for them to kind of recreate themselves and refine themselves, find their souls. So it was just really moving. We had the art was displayed at the United Nations for the Year of the Girl Child, so we were really excited, and all the kids whose art was in the exhibit were really excited about it. So it's been great, and I've been able to take the program mostly to detention centers. I've taken it through Latin America, in different places in the United States.
Wow, that's beautiful work, Rev. Right
Thank
on.
you.
Yeah, for
Thank
sure.
you.
Hey,
And
so
right now we have a program I just started. I'm the director for a program in Tijuana called the Resilience Program. And we work with migrant families. These are all the families that were either in detention here in the United States and have been deported. And so the streets of Tijuana are full of migrants. It's unbelievable. You can see, like, if you look down a street, like, you can see all this patchwork of different colors. And basically it's blankets where people are just sleeping on the streets. So we created an 8-day program for the migrants, and it teaches them math, reading, literacy. We also have a real strong component on mental health because a lot of these people are completely traumatized. So we have a mental health department that comes in and helps them with that. And then art, yoga, music, all of those things to heal the soul.
yeah, that's something some people don't understand as far as how is that Tijuana or some border towns have migrants, so many migrants. And the thing that people don't understand, a lot of people don't understand, is that a lot of those are South American migrants that wind up coming to Mexico for better jobs.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we think about that, okay? People
Absolutely.
are coming to Mexico for better jobs. That's why there's so many migrants there. And
Absolutely.
what they wind up doing is pushing out Mexican citizens from those jobs. So, okay, where do they go?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
it's not a very simple, hey, stay in Mexico
No.
type of bumper sticker answer.
Right. It's been, and then, we had, I think it's like Tijuana had thousands of Haitians that came a few years ago. And it was right about the election, right when Obama was leaving. And, what happened was there were, bunch of Haitians that were labor workers in Brazil in the Amazon. And then I think what happened is that project stopped. They didn't have any more money. And they deported them all, and they had nowhere to go. And so I believe there was a Roman Catholic priest in Tijuana who had set up a deal or whatever, set up an opportunity for them to cross over and go into the United States. But then, all of a sudden, who got voted in, and that stopped. And so they all ended up staying in Tijuana. The good thing is that they have been able to blend in to the community really well. They've learned the language quickly. They've opened up their restaurants and their little salons and stuff. And so they're thriving, which is good.
Yeah, it is, yeah. Hey,
But one of the things I've been saying for the longest time, working in a detention center for undocumented youth and seeing what was happening and with who was in office in those last 4 years, that Mexico would become the dumping ground for migrants. I just saw that. It just seemed so. It was like they're going to get dumped. That's exactly where they're going to get dumped, is in the border towns.
yeah, and again, that's not very clear to a lot of people around the world. It's that Mexico has a lot of migrants in there. Has a lot of people from other countries.
Other countries, right? Absolutely.
Trying to do the same thing, get jobs.
Yeah. Everybody's and what's so sad is that I've always felt frustrated because California was Mexico. And so a lot of times we get labeled as the migrants. It's like, wait a minute, we've always been here. Everybody else was a migrant. You know what I mean?
But Rev, I wanted to ask you something. You're talking about young people who get trafficked and then they wind up in detention centers here in the States. How do we wind up finding those trafficked young people? I mean, do we find them because they're crossing the border, or
Well, I had one young little girl who, she was, I think, about 16 years old, and she had left Guatemala and came up with the traffickers to Tijuana. And in Tijuana, and because she was going to Florida, was her final destination, she was going to live with her sister. And the traffickers separated her, and they took her to a house, and they sold her. They sold her for sex in this house. And then about, maybe 3 months later, one day, the trafficker said something to her like, we're not going to be here today. Don't even try to escape. She said that the house was surrounded by a gate, and inside the gate there were like 20 dogs, just ferocious dogs. And they said, don't even try to escape, because if you do, the dogs are going to get you. They're going to bite you. And she thought, oh my God, what do I do? What do I do? If I stay, they'll continue to, sell me and abuse me. And if I leave, the dogs are going to bite me. And she said, I'm just going to try to leave. And so she went to the door and turned the doorknob, right? And the dogs heard her and just started growling and everything. And she said, oh God, just be with me. Just be with me. And she opened the door and walked out. And the dogs looked at her and they just laid down and let her walk out. And I was like, oh my God. I go, honey, they just recognized your innocence. And so basically she ran to the border and was arrested and taken to the detention center for undocumented youth. And now she is here legally because of there's an act, the Violence Against Women's Act. Because of that act, she was able to be processed through the courts, and she is now here legally and living in Florida with her sister. And she texted me after that, and she said, she sent me a text, and she said, Evidenda, I'm in Disney World. I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. It was like so sweet. And I wrote back, I said, you're in Disney World with all the little princesses just like you.
Wow. And that's
yeah, there's some heavy duty stories.
An amazing story.
Amazing. I mean, it's unbelievable what these children go through. I had one little boy from El Salvador. He was probably about 12 years old. And at the detention center, their parents can call and talk to them. And this one little boy kept coming up to me. He goes, I can't take the call. I go, what happened? And he's like, well, my mom sent me and my sister, who is 7 years old. He said, just get out of here. Go north, because there's so much violence. And they got on the beast, the train that leaves, down in Chiapas and comes all the way up through Mexico. And he said that about the third day, the train stopped and they were really, really hungry. They hadn't eaten in 3 days. And he told his sister, just stay here. I'll be right back. I'm going to go see if I can find something to eat. And when he came back, his sister was gone. They had kidnapped her.
And he couldn't take
he's
the
like,
call.
how do it's horrible.
Gosh.
He's like, how do I tell my mom? I lost my sister? It's like, oh my God, these kids carry the world on their backs.
Yeah. Reverend Mary, hey, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to come on the show again, man.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
This was a great conversation. I really did just love
thank you for
talking to
having
you,
this
man.
platform. This was wonderful. I'm so glad you have this and that people can. This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Now, is there some way, if you're still active, that people can get a hold of you or find out what you're doing, or?
Sure. I have my website, which is the Guadalupe Art Program. And I also have my practice, my hypnotherapy practice, and people can call. I do Zoom. It's amazing because I have clients all over the world. It's, now with Zoom, we can see people everywhere, which is great. And like I said, I really specialize. My specialty is in trauma recovery. So I work a lot with our first offender, our first responders and our veterans, and also victims of trauma, sexual assault, human trafficking, all of that.
Hey, so when you say you're doing hypnotherapy sessions through Zoom, I'm imagining like the whole movie kind of thing where people are looking at the watch trying to fall asleep, going back and forth.
Well, we don't really have to do it that way. You can do it that way, but, that's not really how you do it. I mean, basically, hypnosis is words. It's suggestions. And what you're doing is you're using, you're in an almost like a sleep state, but you're awake. You can hear everything. And so you're using your subconscious mind, which is 88% of your mind power, not just the 12% that you use when you're conscious and awake. So that 88% of your mind power, it is like everything is in there. Every bad thing anybody called you, if they called you fat or stupid, I mean, it's there, And we vent a lot of that out to our dreams. But through hypnotherapy, we can get to that 88% and just start knocking out all the negative belief systems in our mind. A lot of times people come to me and they'll say, oh, I don't know, you're going to be controlling my mind. I don't know, hypnosis is scary. And I'm like, no, that's not how it is. Basically, I have to dehypnotize you from believing that you can't stop smoking or you can't stop eating or whatever it is that you are struggling with. It's like you're believing that you can't do it. And so with hypnosis, you go into the 88% of the subconscious mind and shift that negative belief into a positive belief.
Oh, okay.
If you ever want a session, I'll give you one. I'd love to.
I'd love a session. That sounds fascinating. You kidding me?
Great. Yeah, it's awesome.
Okay.
It's awesome. I work with a lot of, I work with children who stutter, or I work with, let's see, who's the last kid? Oh, I had one little kid from Greece who was a bedwetter. And so it's really amazing. Everything's in our subconscious mind. Everything.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Reverend Mary Moreno Richardson, once again, thank you for taking the time. Do me a favor, do not hang up the phone.
Okay.
Everybody else, I'm going to play a little bit of music, and then I'll be right back. Once again, that was Reverend Mary Moreno Richardson, and you know what? I really can't thank her enough for just coming on the show, man, and talking to me. I truly do appreciate it, man. If you have a question or a comment about this episode, you can send us an email that is inmygrow@gmail.com. Well, brothers and sisters, you know what? That's the end of my notes. That's the end of the show. Don't forget to leave a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and then go over to inmygrow.com and subscribe to the website. You can also go over to subscribe to the YouTube channel. That is youtube.com/inmygrowshow. And don't forget, you can leave a financial donation. That is at patreon.com/inmygrow. All amounts are welcome. You know, we use those funds to pay for different hosting fees, to pay for equipment. You know, leave $1, leave $2. Again, we use it all. So yeah, that's it. You know, I love you all very much. And remember to always grow, learn, and teach.